Why is Corsica still so violent? For decades, this Mediterranean island was scarred by an armed separatist insurgency that staged thousands of attacks. But while that conflict ended long ago, Corsica remains deeply troubled by its legacy. Today, it has one of the highest murder rates in all of France. All this has come to international attention with the recent killing of a prominent former nationalist leader who was assassinated after he returned from exile to attend his mother's funeral. So, just how did a long-finished struggle for national liberation transform Corsica into one of France's most violent regions? Hello and welcome. I'm James Ker-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict and security. We tend to think that the end of an armed insurgency marks the beginning of a new era of peace. But that isn't always the case. Sometimes the end of an uprising doesn't lead to a new period of calm and reconciliation. Instead, the structures, networks and relationships forged during the violent conflict simply mutate in a new direction. No longer directed against the state, fighters often turn to organised crime. The French island of Corsica is a good case in point. For decades, it had a troubled history of nationalist militancy. However, while the armed uprising eventually subsided, the island remains marred in violence, as highlighted by the recent shocking murder of a prominent former nationalist leader. Corsica is located in the Mediterranean Sea, southeast of mainland France and north of the Italian island of Sardinia. With just 340,000 inhabitants, the island's population is small compared to many French regions. However, it has its own distinctive identity. Corsicans have traditionally spoken their own language alongside French and have a culture shaped by history, geography, society and family networks. Politically, the island is an integral part of the French Republic. As one of France's 18 administrative regions, it's formally divided into 2 départements. However, its political status has long been complicated by a powerful undercurrent of resentment at perceived marginalisation by the central state. Many Corsicans have long felt that the national government has neglected the island and its citizens. And it's all this that opened the way for separatist sentiment. To understand the current situation, we need to explore the island's long history. Although Corsica had been part of the Roman Empire, by the Middle Ages it had become largely independent, ruled by a patchwork of local lords and family clans. However, starting in the 13th century, it gradually came under the control of the Republic of Genoa, a powerful maritime state based in what is now northern Italy. This lasted until 1729, when a major rebellion led to the emergence of a Corsican state. But while this saw the creation of a constitution and efforts to build its own institutions, Genoa refused to give up its claim until 1768. Unable to defeat the rebellion and keen to offload the unruly territory, it passed Corsica to France. From the start, France asserted its control over the island. Having defeated Corsican forces within a year, it extinguished any remaining vestiges of the island's independence and integrated it into the French state. And just months later, Corsica's most famous native son, Napoleon Bonaparte, was born on the island. Throughout the 19th and early 20th century, Corsica was steadily incorporated into France, not only politically but socially and culturally. As Paris steadily centralised its control over the island, the French language and culture became dominant, while the traditional Corsican language and customs were gradually marginalised. Meanwhile, amidst economic underdevelopment, many Corsicans left the island to seek opportunities either in mainland France or in the expanding French colonial empire. And while the island was occupied by Italy and Germany during the Second World War, it was liberated by Free French forces and local resistance fighters in 1943 and eventually returned to full French rule. But beneath the seemingly calm surface, the old frustrations continued to grow. On top of this, new grievances began to emerge. As mass tourism rapidly expanded in the 1960s, many Corsicans became increasingly angry at the growing environmental damage it was all doing. All this steadily fueled nationalism as many Corsicans came to believe that the island's only hope for the future lay in controlling its own affairs. Ultimately, everything came to a head in the 1970s when a militant independence movement started to gain prominence. Although several groups existed, the most notable was the National Liberation Front of Corsica, the FLNC. Founded in 1976, it carried out numerous bombings and other attacks against state institutions, banks and other symbols of French authority as it aimed to draw international attention to Corsica's plight and to pressure the French government into granting either autonomy or independence. All the while, the independence campaign also started to make political gains. One of the most notable figures in this regard was Alain Orsoni, a member of a well-known nationalist family. After serving time in a French jail, he returned to the island and established the front's political wing, the Movement for Self-Determination. But while the separatist movement appeared to be gaining strength, Corsica paid a heavy price. Although the French government granted some concessions, including a special administrative status, it refused to negotiate with the FLNC and imposed a tough security crackdown. Taken together with the ongoing bombings, all this contributed to a climate of fear and instability. As a result, Corsican society was steadily torn between those who supported an armed struggle for independence, those who sought peaceful democratic solutions, and those who simply wanted to get on with their lives without fear of separatist violence or police repression. At the same time, deep and sometimes violent divisions also began to emerge within the nationalist movement as different FLNC factions vied for power. All this was highlighted in 1996 when Orsoni went into exile and the MPA collapsed. I hope you're finding this useful. If so, please do give it a like and don't forget to subscribe for regular updates on international relations. Thanks so much, and now back to the video. By the late 1990s, things were changing. Many Corsicans were now tired of the violence and wanted an end to the fighting. As the FLNC fragmented, many in the nationalist movement began to abandon the armed struggle in favour of politics. While the insurgency certainly didn't end overnight, following the turn of the millennium, it declined significantly as popular support shifted to Corsican nationalist parties. But despite hopes that all this would open a new era for the island, the end of the separatist violence didn't in fact bring peace. While many militants gave up their armed struggle, others turned their attention elsewhere. Instead of fighting for independence, they now turned to organised crime. The networks that had once carried out bombings and attacks instead became criminal groups, focusing on extortion, drug trafficking and money laundering across jealously guarded gang territories. All this, in turn, profoundly affected the island. As the complex links between former militants, family clans and organised crime have fueled vendettas, reprisals and turf wars, Corsica now suffers from one of the highest murder rates in all of France. All this would come to international attention in January 2026 when Alain Orsoni was assassinated. After having spent a decade in exile in the United States and then Nicaragua, he'd finally returned to Corsica in 2008. But instead of resuming separatist politics, he instead portrayed himself as a businessman rather than a militant leader, becoming best known for his involvement in Corsican football. But over time, questions grew about his connection to the island's criminal networks, and as a result, he eventually left the island again. However, at the start of 2026, he returned to attend his mother's funeral, and it was there that he was shot dead in an attack that has shocked the island. While French investigators and many on the island believed that the killing was linked to organised crime rather than to nationalist politics, the reaction to his murder has certainly been mixed. For those who remember him as a nationalist leader and political figure, the news has been greeted with sadness. but many others recognise that his later years were seemingly spent blurring the lines between politics, business and the criminal networks. In this regard, he became a prominent symbol of how key parts of the nationalist movement had transformed after the end of the armed uprising. So, what should we make of all of this? Ultimately, Corsica's modern history underscores a common problem. When a violent insurgency ends, it doesn't always mean the start of a new era of peace. In many cases, armed separatist groups, many of which had turned to crime to fund their rebellion, can pivot towards full-time trafficking and extortion. In the case of Corsica, this has had a profound effect. While the island remains a beautiful holiday destination, attracting large numbers of tourists, the legacy of the armed uprising is still felt many decades after it ceased to be a prominent force. While many Corsicans still feel culturally distinct and seek greater control over their political affairs, language and resources, the ideal of liberation has been overshadowed by the very real costs of violence as organised crime and gangland killings continue. In this sense, the assassination of a nationalist figure like Alain Orsoni highlights how a violent independence movement can instead transform into something far more insidious. I hope you found that useful. If so, here are some more videos that may be interesting. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.